All right, I don't have much more to say, as only that I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. The morning was very rich, and I give you into the hands of our very capable moderator of this afternoon, Marijn Gijsbers.
Thank you, Jan. Jan has only recently moved to Brazil. Because we're starting on time. How do you do that, Jan? We're on Dutch time. That's really good. Okay, so what's the subject of this afternoon? How to grab the essence of her timeless message. Quite a challenge for our three speakers this afternoon. And we'll be repeating the same thing we did this morning. So we have 3 lectures from the 3 different branches. Then we'll split up in subgroups, and we'll come back to harvest together. Now, our first speaker, welcome back. Our first speaker joined the French Theosophical in 1978. He is taking care of a Paris lodge. I need to ask him what taking care exactly means, but it probably means revitalizing, organizing all kinds of stuff. And like we've heard from the speakers this morning, we like to multitask, right? He gives talks, he organizes courses, he does the translation of articles for the Lotus Blue, or Bleu, I should probably say. And he's also a member of the TOS. His name is Jacques Manisch.
Thank you. Okay, dear brother and sister, that's right, yes it is. When I was proposed this subject, I think at first it's great. I mean, it's very exciting. And when I start digging inside, I say, oh my God, that's almost what we call mission impossible in French. So you will have to bear with me, because to be able to put everything in 30-minute presentation is a real challenge. So let's start with something everyone knows, the magic year, 1888. But maybe not everybody knows what happened during this year. So it starts with Benjamin Harrison elected 23rd President of the US. Oscar Wilde wrote The Happy Prince and Other Tales. Van Gogh printed his Yellow Chair. Tchaikovsky composes the Fifth Symphony, one of the best. Nikola Tesla invented his induction motor. Heinrich Hertz produced and detected the radio waves, so it's not so far. And George Eastman introduced the first roll film camera. Seems strange, but it is just to illustrate the fact that at this time, there was a lot of things going on in terms of art, culture, industry, and politics, of course. And at the same time, as you know, Madame Blavatsky published her magnum opus, The Secret Doctrine. She said, the Secret Doctrine is not a treaty or a series of vague theories, but contain all that can be given out to the world in this century. And she said this work is dedicated to all true theosophists in every country and of every race. This enormous work, 3 feet high pile, and remember, written by hand, for the original manuscript, was written by HPB during the period from 1884 to 1887. Colonel Olcott remembered even that the work had already started as early as 1879. Since at that time, many editions were released, adding material and creating controversy about their genuine origin. The 1890, first of all, the original edition, of course. Then in 1893, the 3rd edition, which brought a 3rd volume. Then in 1938, the Adair edition, which split the 1893 edition in 6 volumes. In the middle of it, I just found out the Theosophical Company edition, which is a copy of the original one. the 1978 Boris de Zirkov edition in 2 volumes, adding an index and a bibliography volume. And Boris wrote, HPB Magnum Opus is intended to present a wholly coherent outline of an ageless doctrine, a system of thought based upon occult facts and universal truth inherent in nature, and which are as specific and definite as any mathematical proposition. As a curiosity, in 2011, Cambridge University Press in New York published the volume 3 of the 1893 edition as part of its Cambridge Library collection. And more recently, in 2014, part of the original manuscript of the secret doctrine known as the Würzburg document was published thanks to Eastern School Press, Colorado. Before the secret doctrine, Madame Blavatsky had already published the 2 volumes of Isis that we know, a first glimpse in esoteric philosophy. Several others will be published in her late years, like Practical Occultism, The Key to Theosophy, The Voice of Silence, and the Theosophical Glossary. In fact, HPB never stopped writing during the years since the foundation of the Theosophical Society. Her collected writing, published by Boris de Zirkov in 14 volumes, is a compilation of all other writing, letter, and article. At this time, as we've heard already, work is still in progress to publish material which were not yet recovered, like some unpublished letters from HPB. And all that is just the emerged part of the eternal wisdom iceberg, which immersed part are all the tradition, religions, and philosophy of the world, exoteric and esoteric. The secret doctrine by itself calls for more than 1,200 quotes from this tradition. So we are left with the Blavatskypedia, about 13,000 pages written by HPB, for which we will try to get the essence of her timeless message. Let's have a quick overview of her message. First of all, it's not a surprise, she talked about theosophy, the timeless divine wisdom which ever exists and which supports the development of life in a world system. She defined it as the archaic wisdom religion, the esoteric doctrine once known in every ancient country, having claims to civilization. And this wisdom, and that's important to remember, all the old writings show us as an emanation of the divine principle. It is important also to understand how she presented it. She said, these truths are in no sense put forward as a revelation, nor does the author claim the position of a revealer of mystic lore, now made public for the first time in the world history. So, in one phrase, we have the key point which will help us capture and understand the essence of her message. First of all, to present what nature is made of, the evolving system of our world. To explain the position and role of man in the evolution scheme, to uncover the fundamental unity from which all religions came, and to reveal some key characteristic of nature unknown to science. Knowing Madame Blavatsky through life, through her biographer, one can wonder how such a woman could encompass all this knowledge, which is going far above any human being brain capability. Listening to witnesses who were close by, nearby her during the early life of the Theosophical Society, and especially when she wrote The Secret Doctrine, it's quite clear that she often acts as a channel, a messenger, listening and gathering most of the contents from what we call occult sources, using occult means. And we had a nice discussion about that this morning. She clearly explained, since early in her life, her connection with the masters, these out-of-time adepts, who are the guardian and messenger of the divine wisdom. This is an important fact when we try to understand the message, the essence of her message. In fact, her message is the message of the brotherhood, transmitted, commented upon, and explained by her. Theosophy existed ever in our world, has ever existed. It is the essence, and its essence was revealed to humanity on a regular basis. It can be traced back in the ancient times. Reference to its teaching is visible in all great religion and tradition of the world. This is one of the strengths of Theosophy. The common core teaching of the religion or tradition are more or less available today, and comparative study can be made. It has been made. It can provide with a strong substantiation to the fundamental teaching of Theosophy. But any linear, what I call literal comparison, will not make it easily visible. Obviously, most of the ancient traditions have either been hidden, veiled, or disfigured by time, copy, translation, or for manipulation of the masses. One needs to enter deeply inside any tradition to grasp the essence and eternal value hidden in it. Even more, one needs to have an as complete as possible direct experience of a tradition, learning, meditating, action, to get to the core of it. In fact, encouraging the study of comparative religion, philosophy, and science is, as we know, the second declared object of the Theosophical Society, and a lot of such activity were performed by Theosophists for the last century, which means there exists a tremendous amount of material in all the branch and of the movement, which may be useful to get public attention and understanding. When Madame Blavatsky does not talk about Theosophy, what would you think she will be talking? She talks about Theosophists. Not a surprise. Why is it so important? Because Theosophy does not exist without Theosophists. So it's as simple as that. Even if we say, okay, Theosophy is everlasting and whatsoever, if there is no Theosophist to transmit it, it stays where it is. It may be useful to recall what she wrote, talking about the Theosophical Society. It is a philanthropic and scientific body for the propagation of the idea of brotherhood on practical instead of theoretical. Action is the name of the game here. So, what are Theosophists, according to HPB? A living body of workers dedicated to the implementation of the divine wisdom in the day-to-day life. And this day-to-day life shall include being and acting in our world with all its dimensions. This should be the playground of Theosophists. And how do we become Theosophists? The first step is usually knowledge acquisition. At this stage of our evolution, we are developing the mental, intellectual organ. And it is one of the most practical means of transmission, communication between men. It is not the only one. It is not the most efficient. We know and we often talk about the channel of the heart, which is less mental and more in tune with higher realities. It does not distort the communication as much as the mental, but it needs special skills to be used. It needs tuning between the transmitter and the receiver, like any radio transmission. So most of the time, we start with intellectual learning. Our world, the tradition, have developed these skills since thousands of years, and we spend usually our 20 or 30, or even more sometimes, first years of life learning, developing the intellect capability. To learn what theosophy is, a large library of texts were elaborated, starting with HPB 1 and enriched with many other theosophist writers, which were involved in the spreading of the message around the world. Most of the successive presidents of the TS Adyar have written many books and have been lecturing around the world, and it proved very useful because one of the main difficulties when encountering HPB writing in their enormous diversity and complexity, anyone who plunged head first in her secret doctrine is usually drowning very quickly. Therefore, to reach the masses, there was a need for simplification. And these people made a tremendous effort to translate the key concept of the wisdom religion into simple words anyone could understand. Here are some examples. Annie Besant, the second president of the TS Adyar, wrote many such books which are still used as primer for new students in theosophy, talking about man and his body, the nature of thoughts, the ancient wisdom, and so on. The other example, not a surprise, is Charles Webster Leadbeater, a controversial character in the history of the Theosophical Society, wrote also some primers for beginners, like an outline of theosophy, a textbook of theosophy, but he is mostly known for his treatise on occultism, Freemasonry, and the liberal Catholic Church, which have colored and somehow modified the original teaching. One of his most famous publications, together with Annie Besant, is the occult doctrine, the occult chemistry, which describes the structure of elemental atoms as seen through clairvoyance. The two other examples I was to quote exactly like Jan made yesterday. There must be some morphogenetic field there because I will be talking also about Sri Ram and Iketemni later on. These are the four which naturally come up. Many other authors have added their understanding, interpretation, and acted as facilitator for the transmission of the essential HPB message to the world. This transmission to the world of Theosophists first is supported by schools of wisdom, seminar, summer school, research group throughout the world. And the implementation of this knowledge in our world at large is made by public lecture, by participation in public organization, and mainly by the development of service activities. And here, the TOS, the Theosophical Order of Services, is the light bearer, bringing an active support to those who need it, but not only. This support is embedded inside the core value of Theosophy. So let's try to go a little bit deeper and take a look at the core of our message. First of all, she talks about Theosophy, what nature, which means the universe, is made of, the evolving system of our world. To understand correctly the meaning of the model of the world HPB presented to us, there is a preliminary requirement clearly stated in the proem of the secret doctrine. We call it the three fundamental propositions that we all know, so we will not read it, we know it by heart in this room probably. With that in mind, HPB then leads us throughout the genesis of the universe and of its component in the first volume of the Secret Doctrine, according to the first stanza of the Book of Zion, the very old book. This is the basis, the foundation for a coherent and all-encompassing presentation of the eternal and cyclic movement, the play of the one, illustrated by the days and night of Brahma in the old Indian tradition. And you will clearly understand that we cannot go any more in detail in that today. Second item on Theosophy, what is the position and role of man in the evolution scheme? The second volume of the Secret Doctrine, the Anthropogenesis, gives us a comprehensive description of the various phases of the development of man on this system, on this planet, at least for the last 18 million years. This is another riddle for our limited intellectual mind. The evolution of man here goes way before what any modern science has determined, and we are back to old tradition to identify some trace of this story. Apart from the facts which are presented here, and for which a dedicated university would be needed to study the details, HPB gives us a broad picture of the genesis and the evolution of man. We understand this evolutionary road and the current status of our development as the continuation of other nature kingdoms. Not the end of evolution, but another step in nature roads to the blossoming of the divine. This gives us a framework inside which we can better understand who we are and why we are here, and what are our roles and responsibilities vis-à-vis the other kingdom of nature. The teachings of the constitution of man and of the gradual development of the various layers also help us to understand our behaviors. A vivid example is the current never-ending and always increasing human quest for more pleasure, more consumption, and less care for others and for nature herself. This is the power of desire, a very strong force in nature, which was developed first by the animal kingdom, and which, when no more controlled and reoriented by higher value, becomes destructive for man. Third point is the fundamental unity from which all religion came. HPB wrote, "There is and can be but one absolute truth in cosmos. And as little as we, with our present limitation, can understand it in its essence, we still know that if it is absolute, it must be also omnipresent and universal. And that in such a case, it must be underlying every world religion, the product of the thoughts and knowledge of numberless generations of thinking men." What does it tell us? She told us that the core message of the wisdom religion, source of all human religion, is still available inside the current stream of the world religion, provided we can undress it from its man-made shell. And HPB showed us how they were disfigured and how they can be read. Then she talked about the key characteristic of nature unknown to science. This is probably the most controversial part of our message if we read it as it was written 130 years ago. She had already filled the complete volume of Isis Unveiled on this matter, and she dedicated part 3 of Volume 1 and Volume 2 of the Secret Doctrine to the subject. It emphasized the importance of the science for her. So why is it so controversial? First of all, HPB had no scientific culture and she never claimed any. Then we need to remember that she was living at this time in a world where materialism was at a stop, with the positivists leading the frenzy. Finally, science made so much progress in this time that many of her sayings are not easily reconcilable with today's scientific knowledge. And we can always say that, okay, that science who doesn't know anything and we know. But the fact is, because there is only one reality, at one point in time, there must be a connection between the divine wisdom and what science is finding every day. And not going in detail, but we can sense, especially since the last 10, 15, 20 years, that scientific is opening up much more than it was in the time of Madame Blavatsky, and opening some road which seems to really be willing to join what we know from the divine wisdom. Finally, talking about Theosophists, she talked about a system of practices for the student on the evolutionary path. At the same time, HPB was explaining what are the core teachings of Theosophy and where we stand as human beings inside the current chain of evolution on the Earth. She devoted a great deal of energy to provide us with a system of practice for our self-transformation. And this is the most important part of her message. If we look at the current state of our world, we can see that the level of knowledge freely available has never been so high. Millions of books are now reachable, covering all intellectual, philosophical, traditional, religious, and scientific matters. And our human world has never been in such a bad shape. We may be at one corner of our mental evolution, and I think HPB already said the same thing, pushed by a strong acceleration toward transformation of the mental desire-driven attitude. This was also probably the feeling of HPB at her time when she wrote, "It means that the world has become mortally sick of the dogmatism, the arrogance, the self-sufficiency, and the spiritual blindness of modern science, which requires, as the price of its service, the sacrifice of man's immortal soul." So she provided us with instruction to her inner circle of students, and she transmitted us this inspiring piece of wisdom, the voice of silence. Written in the language of the heart, it gives essential path instructions which can be traced back in the Buddhism and Hinduism tradition. So let's move a little bit more inside the core of the message. To go deeper and deeper inside the teaching, we have to walk through various layers of increasing complexity. From the top, the stanza of Zion, it is almost impossible to get a clear and understandable picture. Madame Blavatsky provides us with a commentary to the stanza, which shed some light, like in the Tibetan Buddhism tradition, the Tanjur commentary add to the Kanjur. Then she had her own commentary supported by many quotes from the then available scholars' publication. The transaction from the Blavatsky Lodge and more recently the unpublished 1889 instruction add many clues to the main theme. And we have here a sum of knowledge which can keep us busy for many lives. After what we call the original teaching of HPB, we also have the multiple interpretation of Theosophists. All try to add their contribution for the sake of a better understanding. And this is just an example, like, for example, the Crotona Institute made some commentary on it. That's the unpublished instruction. That's a treaty from a French guy, Chevrier, who wrote an essay on the Sacred Doctrine. Many things, a special attention there, even if we cannot see it very clearly. These are the publication of our friend David and Nancy Riegel from Colorado, who dedicate their whole life to work on trying to understand the root source of the Book of Dzyan. All try to add their contribution for the sake of a better understanding. Some of them stay faithful to the original. Some other ones departed from the original, creating debates and separatism between Theosophists. That's one of the root causes of what we are trying to address. If we take a look at the phenomenon from some distance, we can see that this behavior is but the repetition of so many human groups who, starting from a single truth, degenerated in multiple half-truths to end up sometime in no truth at all. Most of the religious or philosophical movements have demonstrated. How can we work with that diversity? We have two approaches which can be complementary. First, our intellectual capability, which are able to discriminate and identify what is coherent, consistent, versus what looks out of scope or inconsistent. And more efficient, we have the understanding of the heart, which can resonate or not with the teachings. It is important to recognize that most of the interpretations which are available in our circles were written by people who dedicate their entire life and energy for the cause of theosophy. This deserves some recognition from our part, even if we may disagree with some contents. There is always something to be learned from, and we may not want to throw the baby with the dirty water after all. Discrimination and heart resonance are the key to knowledge acquisition in this matter. Regarding the core of the teaching on the world system and the role of man in the evolution require mainly a scholar attitude together with an open heart. Following the multiple tracks HPB gave us in our original publication, using existing commentary, cross-checking in the tradition of the world, that is a very powerful way also. We may get to it. It's a matter of time and energy spent. And here we may want to remember that Madame Blavatsky was working between 16 and 20 hours a day for years. Reaching the core of the teaching on the practice is another story. It requires much more than mere mental and intellectual skills. It calls for a real inner transformation. It is asking for a dramatic change in our common behavior. The voice of silence brings simple and inspiring practice for this transformation. All this transformation is nothing more than what most of the inner religions call for, purifying our personalities to become channels for the divine light to shine in our world. Further instructions were delivered by HPB, first to her inner circle and then made public. And other theosophists have also had their understanding and experience. Just to illustrate that, back to I.K. Temni, he wrote extensive commentary on the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, together with some glimpse into the psychology of yoga. And interesting enough is his treatise on the self-culture is a combined presentation of the constitution of man and the relevant practice for each layer. Another example is Sri Ram, who taught many schools of the wisdom using the three theosophical classics at the feet of the master, light on the path and the voice of silence, for the student to awake to a deeper awareness and to start inquiry. This is another key point of HPB core message. Learn and experience by yourself. Do not rely on any authority. Practice is the most important part of her core teaching for theosophists, for the theosophical societies, and for the human world. Self-transformation, dedication of our effort, and practice of the service for others are the pillars of our capability to transmit our heritage, a living heritage, not a pile of books, to the world. This leads us to the end of this talk, talking about some driver in our behavior on the path. We've already touched base with that: belief, trust, and knowledge of unity. Let's explore them very briefly. Let's talk about belief to start with. First of all, it is a mindset with which the personality wraps it into in order to protect its ego sense. Before any divine thoughts can emerge from the heart, there is a sense of looseness. There is a sense of being alone in this fiery world full of dangers and misery, a lack of understanding of our world and of our role in it. This can lead to panic, and grasping and holding to a belief is like a life vest. But it can be harmful, and it has led to dreadful, disastrous consequences for human community, either talking about religious extremism like the Christian Inquisition or political extremism like fascism. This is blind belief HPB condemned. But there is another type of belief, which is the leading path to faith. On the pathway to spirituality, there is an initial phase when the first call of the divine is triggering our mental being with a lot of question, interrogation, to which no rational answer can be found. All our lower personality, emotion, reasoning, will cannot know the transcendent, at least at the beginning. Before we can experiment this first glimpse of divine light shining in our heart, we need to redirect our energies toward this still unknown. Here, a belief in a set of hypotheses may be useful, not as a blind, binding engagement, but as a catalyzer of our will and thoughts. Then, the act of faith is the natural result of the personal experience of the presence. The second item is trust. When driving at night in the middle of a dark countryside, we trust our GPS, isn't it? Maybe sometimes we should not. When climbing on a mountain, we trust the robustness of the rope. This is our life, which is hanging from this rope. When we enter the path of spirituality, we also need a rope and a GPS that we can trust. This trust enables us to move forward without seeing the ground below our feet. After a while, we gain confidence when we start realizing the progress made. This is outer trust. It helps building the inner trust, the solid and powerful basis, which gives the necessary self-confidence not only to go over the difficulty of our path, but also to be an efficient servant at the service of humanity. And finally, unity, knowledge of unity, the starting and the ending point of each of our evolution loops. It is also the most essential law in our universe. The knowledge of unity can start with a belief, then a faith, which would then build trust, and more than trust. It can give us an unshakable basis, solid as a rock, for our growing inner being on his evolutionary path. Feeling this unity in our heart and manifesting it through action can dissolve any separateness, like, for example, between the various streams of Theosophists. We may want to plow the garden for this magnificent flower to bloom. As a conclusion, how to grasp the essence of HPB timeless message? I don't think I have a firm answer, but at least my experience is that it starts with learn, meditate, practice, here and now, on a permanent basis, with an inquisitive mind and an open heart. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jacques. It brings to mind one of the quotes that you used last year about the real reason why scientists practice science. Because they like to be marveled by nature. Right? Excellent. Thank you very much. So, for our next speaker, I have to look up the years. So, our next speaker joined...